Well, another former chief minister thinks Gibraltar could not have planned things better. As it has left the EU with rights in the UK market, it would have been extremely difficult to have convinced the UK to give it otherwise. So Joe Bossano told Viewpoint the Rock is closer to the UK now than it has been in 47 years, and he thinks that's very significant.
Well, I think we actually as a government in 1988 and afterwards did more to try and capitalize on the advantages of being in the European Union than anybody else. We tried to be ahead of the game. When they created the single passporting license for banks, we marketed ourselves because there was a very long queue in Luxembourg as a jurisdiction to get a banking license, and in fact the investment that came in from Scandinavia to create Europort was going to be the entry port for the single banking license. Regrettably, although I had been promised in writing that this was going to happen, when the time came, the UK did not deliver passporting for Gibraltar licenses, and therefore we missed the boat. So there were opportunities that we could have taken that we didn't take because of our dependence on the UK delivering for us. What we negotiated in the beginning, I came in at the tail end of that because I stood for election in 1972. The first legislation on which I voted in Parliament as a member of the opposition in 1972 was the accession to the European Union. So in a way, for me, the perspective is I was there when we came in and I'm there when we've come out. So how much are we losing and how much are we gaining? Well, actually, we couldn't have planned it better if we'd had a crystal ball.
Why did you say that?
Because you see, we didn't have access to the UK market in 1972. And what happened in 1973 was the first time that the UK treated us as a separate nation was in 1973. And they signed with Aurelio Montegrifo, who was the Minister for Health, a bilateral health service agreement, as if we were two independent states agreeing to provide health cover for each other's citizens. First time in our history, highly important, nobody paid any attention to it. But that was the beginning of a situation which developed because of the predicament that as far as the EU was concerned, there was only one member state with a territory which was not part of the member state according to the member state's constitution, but part of the member state as far as the others were concerned. So when they said at the time there are 12 member states, Gibraltar was part of the United Kingdom member state. This is why if we didn't comply with EU law, they took the UK to court and not us. So we didn't have the jurisdiction, the locus standi, to sue anybody, but of course nobody could sue us either. And therefore the Foreign Office invented this concept that if you were looking at the United Kingdom from Calais, you would see the member state UK and Gibraltar. But if you are looking at the EU from Dover, you would see the other member states and Gibraltar. So we were a separate state for UK and the same state for the EU. And everything that followed from that meant that the United Kingdom had to replicate the rights they gave to the other members by giving them specifically to us. So for the purpose of our licenses, allowing a bank in Gibraltar still today to open branches in the other 27, we are deemed to be coming from the UK. But for the purpose of opening a branch in the UK, we've got a bank that has got a branch in London, we are deemed to be coming from another member state. So we come from another member state to go in the EU, in the UK, and from the UK to go into the EU. What happens now? What happens now is that the UK has agreed that what we gained in access to the UK as a result of joining the European Union, we will not lose on leaving the European Union. I think it would have been extremely difficult to have achieved those rights in the UK market if we had not first been in the EU. I mean, for the UK, it was inconceivable, for example, in 1986, that Spanish companies would have more access to the UK than we did. So, politically, they had no choice. They had to give it to us. And politically, they have had no choice but to let us keep those rights, given the overwhelming vote to stay and the fact that we're only coming out because they chose to come out. The rights that we're losing in the other 27, we are retaining in the UK, and it is my view, I'm absolutely convinced of it, from my knowledge of dealing with London, that we would never have got those rights if we had not both been in the EU, and failure to give us would have been totally unacceptable discrimination against us, as happened with the vote. We didn't get the vote because the UK wanted us to have a vote. We got the UK because we took them to the European Court of Human Rights and they lost.
It sounds like Gibraltar in this period has managed to outmaneuver on a few occasions or outplay the UK government. But would you say that we're also closer to the UK government now than we were when we entered the EU?
I think yes, to the highest degree that I've ever known in the 47 years. Even in the time of Joshua Hassan, which was very close to the UK, frankly, the closeness to the UK usually resulted in us doing what they wanted, not in them doing what we wanted. This is not the case anymore. I mean, it's very significant that, the United Kingdom wanted to persuade me not to have National Day celebrations in casemates, which I refused. Because it upset Spain and therefore it created problems for them. And I think they influenced Peter Caruana to discontinue the casemates rally after the 2006 constitution, using the 2006 constitution as the argument, but really because it made negotiations with Spain more difficult, because for them it was rubbing their nose in it to celebrate our separate identity and our nationhood every year. Well, from that constant pressure to stop doing it, to endorsing it by having an annual message of video from the Prime Minister is a hell of a change.
So that means not 1 inch of rock, not 1 slice of calentita.
You're feeling optimistic about our departure from the European Union. You think that it'll present, and already has, opportunities that Gibraltar will make the most of?
Look, the National Economic Plan that we've drafted and on which we fought and won the election is a conservative estimate. It's a cautious approach. It's because we're entering into an unknown territory. We know what we're carrying with us, and therefore we know where the departure is not disadvantageous, because we are retaining something that is a result of having been members, which we would not have had otherwise. But what happens in the United Kingdom and what happens in the global economy is something that we cannot escape from anymore. We are part of that global economy. And the IMF is still talking about the possibility not just of a recession now, they're talking about the possibility of a depression, and they're talking about comparing the next few years like the 1930s. There are many things affecting the global economy which are negative. And therefore, what I can say is I'm absolutely confident that we will achieve the targets we've set in the in the manifesto on the economy. It is likely, in fact, that in the first year we will do better than 2.5%, because this was done on the premise that we would have left in October 19. Mm-hmm. And we're not leaving until December 20. So when we drafted that for the election, it was before there was a change of date, and therefore it is likely that we will do better than 2.5% in year one. Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that the factors that are going to determine Gibraltar's slowing down of its economic growth, are those factors not Brexit?
They are Brexit, but not our Brexit, the Brexit of the United Kingdom. If an economy the size of the UK, a net contributor and a big customer of the EU, leaves with a relationship that is less than that of a full member, the trade between the two will reduce. There's no question about that, you see. So the departure of the United Kingdom will be a negative factor for global growth.
For somebody who perhaps crosses into Spain every now and then to enjoy a walk in the countryside, a weekend away, do you think that aspect of that current quality of life is going to deteriorate? Is it going to get harder to enjoy any time in Spain?
Well, I think one important thing to understand about the border with Spain is that on the 1st of next month, it is the border between us and the European Union, right? And therefore, from a point of international law, it is not the border that is at the mercy of Madrid, it's at the mercy of Brussels. And what is supposed to happen at that border in terms of movement of people is what is supposed to happen in Calais if you come from Dover, or what happens in Malta if you come from North Africa. You know, the border controls are the borders of the external perimeter of the European Union. Does that mean that they're going to have to put, as happens now in London, you go in London and you have to put your passport in a machine before when you get off the plane? Well, look, it may be that is a delaying factor. I don't know what kind of regime will apply, but people need to understand that there may be situations when there are delays, and that, you know, it's not for me to defend Spain, but that those delays may not be in fact the result of a decision by Spain, but of a decision by the European Union in the center. If they say, well, because of a terrorist threat, we're going to tighten the external borders, we're in that situation that we are in an external border, unless we've been able to agree, because of potential agreements with non-member countries about movement up to a certain distance from the border, and those distances are bigger than the whole of our country. So there may be something that we're able to agree, which already exists in other borders, where you can move in and out with less controls, but only up to a certain distance. Look, we've managed to do in Gibraltar something that defies any logic. We live on a lump of limestone that cannot sustain life. It has no agriculture, no water. We enjoy a quality and a standard of living here that is better than in the things that matter, in terms of the level of unemployment, in terms of the support for education and for university education, and for, you know, what we do in home ownership. And this doesn't exist anywhere else. What we need to do is make sure that we preserve outside the European Union, in a more difficult global climate, what we've got today. If we improve, then that'll be a great result. But if at least we preserve it, then that's something that should be enough to make everybody happy.
So Joe Bossano, always a fascinating interview. He said outside the EU, Gibraltar's border with Spain will be at the mercy of Brussels, though he thinks it may be possible to reach an agreement which would allow movement with fewer controls up to a certain distance from the frontier, and he says such arrangements already exist elsewhere, and those distances are bigger than the whole of our country. You're watching GBC's Viewpoint.